I'm Ed Adams, and this is the weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps new genealogists get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. For most Americans, one of the big goals in doing genealogy is not just getting a better understanding of the broader story of your family history, but it's finding out specifically where your people came from and when they came to the United States. We're a country of immigrants, and for those of us who care about our history, we want to understand that motivation and to understand who we came from, who really are our people. Now, for most Americans, that's an almost impossible question to answer because our people could come from a number of different cultures across a dozen or so countries. So, even though your name might be Fisher and you've always thought of yourself as being an American of German descent, as you work on your family history, you're likely to find that you're German, English, Irish, French, maybe even Czech and Polish. That doesn't mean you can't celebrate Oktoberfest with the best of them. It just means that finding your people can oftentimes open up some pretty complex questions that will only have more complex answers. But for most of us, for one reason or another, one of these cultures or nationalities will speak to us more deeply than the others, and will fixate on trying to understand everything that we can about our mother country. Eventually, that's going to involve having to work with records from that country. Unless the culture that you've attached yourself to comes from the British Isles, that's going to involve working with non-English records. If you're a polyglot and you've got no problems picking up a new language or three, then you don't need anything from today's episode. For the rest of us, let's talk about researching in foreign languages. Growing up, I took Spanish in school for about 6 years. I think by the end of that, I was approaching a sort of rudimentary fluency. I could carry on a conversation about most non-technical things, and if I was eavesdropping on a Spanish conversation, I could understand it almost completely. But that was a very, very, very long time ago. With the exception of a brief assignment to a predominantly Spanish-speaking unit in the Army, I've never had to use my Spanish outside of school. And as they say, if you don't use it, you lose it. That's certainly true of my degree of fluency, but it never really fully goes away. Like I said a few episodes ago, I've found myself doing quite a bit of Mexican research lately and was pleasantly surprised with how easy it's been to deal with Spanish records. So to be clear, I could not have a conversation in Spanish right now if my life depended on it. If I was to overhear a Spanish conversation, I'd probably still understand the gist, but I'd miss a lot of details. When you're reading a document, it's different. It's easier just because you have time with it. It's not a live, happening now back and forth repartee that requires you to put your brain in overdrive. You can sit with it and use context clues and a dictionary if you need to. I've also done quite a bit of research in Ukrainian records, and I've not taken 6 years of Ukrainian. I used Duolingo every day for about a year. I cannot converse. I cannot eavesdrop. I can read just enough to get the gist of most publications. But again, while maybe it's not quite as simple as when I research Spanish, I have been able to do it without a great deal of difficulty. So lesson 1 is, do at least some minimal studying of the language that you're going to be researching in. I've never studied Finnish, so I wouldn't even attempt to dive into Finnish language research. But there are so many places these days that you can study languages, and most of them are pretty good at least getting the basics down. So I'm not going to offer any recommendations other than to say, find an app or a website that you like, and just work on it every day for a few months. Outside of learning the alphabet, if it's not written in Roman or Latin characters, and learning some basic vocabulary, you'll want to pay attention to things like sentence structure. What do verbs, adverbs, and other parts of speech look like? You may not know the word, but you recognize that it's a verb within the sentence. You might be able to context clue your way through it, but once you head to the dictionary, understanding the conjugation of verbs will allow you to better understand what that verb means in the context of the document that you're looking at. You'll also want to know, how does the language structure its word order? Does it contain things like noun cases that can embed additional meaning into the nouns beyond just what the noun means by itself? Armed with at least a little bit of knowledge of your target language, there are some additional things that you're going to want to be aware of before you jump headfirst into foreign language research. The first is to be mindful that everything, including names, will be written in their native form. For example, perhaps you're looking for records about one of your immigrant ancestors, Mindaugas Jankowski, who lived in Chicago in the early 20th century. His naturalization documents indicate that he was born in a part of the Russian Empire that, since 1918, has been part of Lithuania. You might be able to find Russian records for him with the last name Yankowski, but with the first name of Mindaugas, he was almost certainly ethnically Lithuanian and not Russian. Yankowski is not a Lithuanian name, but Jankauskas is. It's never this easy, though, because depending on the record source that you're looking at, it may not be in Russian or in Lithuanian. Most church records for the predominantly Roman Catholic country will be in Latin. The funny thing is, though, despite being a Latin document, written about Lithuanian people, in the Russian Empire, they frequently use Polish name spellings. I assume this is some sort of leftover from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but I'm not an expert. If any Lithuanian experts are out there listening, please send me a message. The lesson here is that you need to know more about your target research area than just the native language. But all this is doable. There's nothing that I've talked about so far that's secret knowledge. Anyone with an internet connection can learn about this in about a half hour of Googling. Learn a little bit about the history of the nation that you'll be researching in. Learn about the record types that you'll be digging into. If you're researching someone who is Orthodox, the records may be in Russian or in Old Church Slavonic. Speaking of Russian, if you're going to be researching in a language that uses a different alphabet, it's usually best to add that alphabet to your computer's keyboard. It's pretty easy to do. On Windows 11, you'll want to go to Settings, Time and Language, and then look for Preferred Languages. Just click Add a Language. Once you've done that, you'll notice a new icon in the lower right of the taskbar. It will likely say ENG for English as your default language, but if you click on that, you'll see the new language you added. Once you select the new language, you'll be able to type in that new language. On a Mac, just go to your system settings and then select Keyboard. Then click the plus at the bottom left of the keyboard settings and then select which language you want. The real challenge is remembering which character is mapped to which button on your keyboard. I recommend one of two things. Either find a good keyboard map online and print it out and keep it as a reference, or you can buy stickers that you can actually put on your keyboard that will show the alternate language characters smaller into one side. I've done both, and while I think the sticker method makes for faster typing, it can be a little annoying to have to painstakingly add all those stickers, and then your keyboard doesn't quite feel the same. It's important, though, because although Ancestry is pretty good at making the translation behind the curtains so that if you search for Dmitri in Roman characters, it can still find a record where the name is written in Cyrillic, it's not perfect, and not every website can do that. So if you just get into the habit of searching using the appropriate alphabet, you're going to miss out on less. But going back to record types, a really important thing about understanding all records really, but certainly records in a language that you're not strong in, is learning the flow of the record. You should spend some time just looking through various records within that collection that you're interested in. Get a sense of how the information is formatted. What sort of boilerplate can you gloss over? Are names written first and last, or last and first? Or in the case of a birth record, you may just see the first name in the column containing the name of the child, and you'll have to look separately at the column for the parents to see the surname. Getting familiar with the records will make it that much easier to find your ancestors in them. I'm sort of coming at this from the perspective of actually digging through record images as opposed to searching and clicking on results, but that's because while there are some records in foreign languages that are indexed on sites like Ancestry, far, far more are not indexed. We may get to a point where AI allows us to rapidly index documents in just about any language, but we're not there yet. So maybe also go back and listen to episode 15, Unindexed Records, for more tips on jumping into the deep end. These tips work great for researching your typical government or church genealogical records. If you find some manuscripts that you're going to want to read through because they contain information about your ancestor, or they explain an event that your ancestor was a part of, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. Without the guide rails of a set format, free text is going to be substantially more challenging to understand without years of study. For that, you're going to want to contact an actual translator. My recommendation is find one that specializes in translating historic documents. Language isn't fixed, and there may be some small or big changes in that language over time. The skill set is a niche, and it's not going to come cheap. I'm battling with that particular aspect right now. I've got a 220-page book I'd like to get translated, but I don't want to fork over the several $1,000s it's going to take to get that done right. Maybe one day once I win the lottery. The moral of the story is, don't be afraid to jump into researching your family in the country of origin just because you may not be fluent in or even familiar with their language. Government and church bureaucracy is government and church bureaucracy pretty much wherever you go. You'll learn quickly that the format of typical genealogical sources are variations on a theme, And with some disciplined study, you don't actually have to become a speaker of the language to be able to confidently research within it. Just think of how proud you're going to be of yourself when you attach that first non-English source to your tree. I hope you found something useful in today's episode. If you've ever done foreign language research before, or if you're currently struggling with it, I'd love to hear about it on Twitter, @thewgtpod, or find me on Facebook. If you're enjoying the podcast as a whole, think about leaving a review. Either way, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.